video, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to compositing, or how you can add one subject into the background of another subject. And this is something that you very well might want to do, something similar in your B-movie posters. Now, every photo is different. There's a lot of different techniques and things you can play around with. There are tons of videos on YouTube you can find that will also maybe show you some different ways of doing this. But the key is you just kind of get in here and play around with it and start with good selections. Okay, so here's a photo of me with my family in Sedona a couple of years ago. As you can see, it was snowing. Only I took the photo and I'm not in it, and I would like to be. So what I'm going to do is take this photo of myself and place it into this photo so that I'm actually there. To start with, I'm going to copy this image into the other image. One of the easy ways to do that is simply using your Move tool. Just click on it and drag up into the file of your other image. And then when that comes on, bring your Move tool down and let go. And now you've got it copied in there in its own layer. Now the next thing I'm going to do is the selection of me on this photo. I'm not going to record those steps because you should know how to do it. However, I will show you the very last part where you do the output to a layer mask instead of output to a selection. Okay, so when you're done making your selection through the select and mask function, what you want to do is, in this case, you want to output, instead of to output to the selection like we did with the bagpipe player, which is simpler. In this case, we want to output to a layer mask, and that's going to give you more full functionality with the rest of the editing that we're going to do. So we click Output to Layer Mask, click OK, and now we can see that that has created our selection into a new layer with a mask. And the way the masks show you is white reveals, black conceals. All right, so now it looks kind of like I'm floating in space, right? I don't know about you, but I kind of felt like I was floating in space a lot during my college years, but that's not what we want in this photo. So now we have to start to deal with how do we blend one image into the other so that it looks a little bit more natural, and start to take a look at what are some of the differences. We've got some differences in the exposure or the brightness, the amount of sun, how clear one picture is. There's a lot of things going on here. So now we're going to get into some of the different editing modes here. And every composite photo is going to be different, but it starts with a good selection. Okay, there's no hard and fast rule about which adjustment you do first. There's a lot of things we have to deal with in this photo. Usually what I do first is what's the most glaring difference. And to me, it's the exposure, or the fact that I'm really bright in the sunlight and my wife and son are in the snow. So obviously there's no sun on them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just move myself a little bit closer so I can see this a little bit better. And oftentimes, one of the best ways to deal with exposure is to remove color from the equation, to look at black and white. So I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. I can do this under Layer, and then New Adjustment Layer, and then say black and white. Or I could also do it here under the adjustment layer. Thanks. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do here is dial back on the exposure on me a little bit, because I'm a lot just brighter in general than the background part of the photo. And to do this, I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. Like I said, I can do this under Layer, New Adjustment Layer. I can go down here to my Layers panel and create New Exposure Level. Now, if I want to only adjust me and not the rest of it, what I need to do is drag this layer to right on top of the layer that I want to adjust. And then the next thing I need to do, and this is important, you have to do this with all the adjustment layers. You have to click this box that shows up at the bottom panel, part of the panel, that says that it's going to only apply the adjustment to the layer directly below. Otherwise, it applies the adjustment to all your layers. So I click that. And now when I adjust the exposure, I'm only adjusting the exposure on me and not on the entire image. What I want to do is darken myself a little bit, which will be a slightly minus number. And what I'm kind of looking for is I would like the dark parts of my clothing to be pretty similar to the dark parts of the clothing and the rest of it, right? That's going to get rid of some of those shadows. So we'll do it about like that. I can play around with the offset. That's not going to help too much on this particular photo. And then I think that's maybe a bit extreme on the exposure, but let's bring up a little bit. Okay, we'll go with that. Now I'm going to deal a little bit with the light and dark levels. And so I'm going to create another adjustment layer, and that is levels. And again, I want to place it right above my mask layer. You know, yours may have come into a different place, but you can drag this layer wherever you want it. And what I want to do with the levels is again, I want to make sure that this is clicked, that it is linked to only the layer below. Right? And so now I would like to adjust a little bit. See if I bring the one on the left up, I'm making my dark levels darker. If I bring the one on the right in, it's making my light ones different. So let's deal with the middle one a little bit. And what I'd like to do is try to match the darks with the darks and the midtones with the midtones a little bit. That's getting just a little bit better right in there. So the next thing I want to deal with here is the color. And, you know, like I said, every photo is different. There isn't necessarily one right or wrong order here. But let's look at the colors. And so I'm going to go down to my mask layer, and I'm going to create a Hue Saturation adjustment layer. Only for this to work, I need to turn off the black and white adjustment layer. And now we can see the color in both of them. And so now working in the Hue Saturation adjustment layer, if I zoom in just a bit, we can see that the color is a lot fuller, a lot brighter on me than it is on the background photo. And that's because it was brighter light, right? So what I probably need to do is dial back on the saturation a little bit. As I do that, it starts to look a little bit more like the level. See, the skin tones starting to get a little bit better. Now I'm a little bit more tan because this was taken after I'd been outside a lot and was a little bit more tan, but we're getting a little bit better there by dialing back the saturation. And I could even dial back the lightness just a little bit, but that's starting to make my jacket too dark. I still want to see a little detail in that, so we're going to leave that alone. And then hue changes the actual color. And I don't think we really need to do much with that other than we could dial, see if we can get the jeans a little bit closer to the same. It might be a little bit better there. Now maybe, yeah, right in there with a little bit of green in the jeans to match these jeans might be better. Okay, the next thing I want to do, I just zoom out a little bit so that we can see I kind of look like a giant here. And so let's get me more to the size that I actually am. And we're going to do that through we could do it through the free transform or the transform scale. Only, let's see, make sure I'm in the correct, yes, I have to be in my correct layer here. And let's start to scale me down a little bit. And you don't really know how tall I am relative to my wife, but I'm just a tiny bit taller. However, I'm scrunched down. That's probably pretty good about there. Whatever looks good when you're trying to deal with these kind of transformations. So I'll click return to accept that transformation. The next thing I'd like to do is compare the crispness or resolution or focus of the two images. So let's zoom in here. And you can see that the image of me is much more sharp than the background image. And so let's see if we can correct that a little bit. And so with the masked layer selected, we're going to go into our filter menu and go into our blur gallery, and I'm going to select a field blur. Experiment with these if you need to deal with backgrounds or the entire field or something like that. But so that's pretty extreme, but let me dial this back because it's set at 15 pixels. That's 6. That's still a little too blurry. That's getting close. That's at 2 pixels. Let's go back up to 3. Okay, so that looks a little bit better to me. And so then we'll hit OK. And we've kind of got the focus about the same as the other image. Now let's move me back into the position I will take up in that photograph and start to see how the whole kind of perspective looks. So I'll zoom out. And with the move tool selected, I'm going to move me over here, looking kind of cold. I have no idea why I'm holding Lamb Chop, but Lamb Chop enjoyed the ride. And I'll position myself somewhere around right in there. One thing that I notice after I've moved myself more into the position that I'm going to be in is that my selection still looks a little crisp relative to the outlines on my wife and son. And so because I saved this to a layer mask, I can go back into select and mask once I have like a lasso or selection tool selected. And I can go to my feather option and just put a little bit of feather on this. I'm going to put about 1.5 pixels on that to kind of soften that edge a little bit. And that looks a little bit better. Now, one of the last major things that's keeping the image of me from looking like it actually belongs in this photo is that you can still tell that the photo of me was taken in the sun. There's strong contrasting shadows. There's that bright spot on my forehead, and my wife and son are in clouds. And so we've got to find a way to dial that back on the photo of me a little bit. So let's go into there. And there are a number of different things that we can try. I'm going to zoom in. And the easiest way to get rid of that spot on my forehead that we don't want is I'm going to take the spot healing brush. You've got healing brush, spot healing brush, patch. If you take the spot healing brush, and let me get the brush a little bit smaller, that's left bracket. And I'm just going to start out here and paint into this area. It will try to correct this. Okay, got rid of that, put a few wrinkles in. Let me undo it. We'll try it again from a different sample spot. and that's better. Okay, and are there some other spots that are particularly strong here? Yeah, maybe down in here. I'll get a little bit bigger brush. Just kind of just trying to soften this stuff a little bit. It's okay. All right. Another thing I can do is to use my burn tool. The burn tool makes things darker. The dodge tool makes things lighter. I can use my burn tool, zoom out, and kind of paint along the areas that are a little bit too bright. Use my left bracket. And you've got exposure and range levels that you can deal with here. I'm just really kind of trying to take out their genes. They don't really matter as far as like if they have smudges in them, because that's kind of what they look like. But I just want to darken them a little bit so they don't look like they're just bright in the sunlight so much. Let's do that on my shoes as well. Just kind of trying to take some of this detail and brightness out of the photo that was obviously taken in bright sunlight and make it match. And since I'm dealing with this layer mask, if I paint outside here, it doesn't change the background because I'm only working in the masked area. So I can be pretty take a pretty heavy hand with this. I'm just kind of darkening that. Okay, let's move up. And yeah, lamb chop is way too bright there given the rest of the photo. So let's try to darken lamb chop a little bit. Get some of those highlights off me a little bit. All right. Kind of getting those edges. And that's starting to look a little bit more like the actual exposure. We can still see some brightness there from the sun that was obviously coming from the right side, but it's looking a little bit more natural now. Okay, let's take a look. The feet down here, they're still a problem. Looks like I've just kind of been dropped in there, which is exactly what happened. It should look like I'm standing in the snow, correct? So let's play around with that a little bit. What we want to do is get some snow looking like I'm not floating on top of a step, and maybe get a little bit of snow around my shoes. So let's fill in the snow a little bit around my feet. To do that, we want to get into the layer that has this content, which is not the masked layer, it's layer 0 right here. And I'm just going to take the clone stamp tool and sample out here where we've got plenty of snow. So that's Option, click. And I'm just going to get rid of this step. And I'll just paint this a few times. So that it all looks clean there. And notice when I go over my foot, it doesn't paint over that because that's in the masked layer. So I'll just do a little bit more and just kind of clear that up so it looks like I'm standing in the snow. Let's take a little bit of snow from over here around their boots and kind of pile it onto my shoes a little bit. So I want to go down to layer 0. Oops. Layer 0. And I'm going to still use my clone stamp tool. I'm going to kind of grab this content right here and paste it over here. So bring my cursor here, hold down the Option key, click. Now go into my mask layer. Just put a little snow on that. That'll work. Okay, let's put a little bit over on this side. Maybe I'll sample from here on my son's foot. So go back to the background layer, hold down the option, sample, go to the masked layer. Okay, that looks like there's some snow on my feet now. The last major problem that I see is that it's snowing in the background photo, right? You see these little drops of snow, they're kind of cool, only there's snow in front of my wife and son. There's no snow in front of me, and that looks obviously a bit artificial. So we've got to figure out a way to get some snow in front of me. And there could be a number of good ways to do this, but what I'm thinking is I'm going to take the snow from the dark areas right here, because that's a pretty good match with my clothing, and I'm going to sample the snow and then paint it over me. This snow, I'm going to go down to layer 0, make a rough selection here. Let's use my lasso tool. This, and what I want to get is the areas that have snow on them in front of the dark clothing. So that's my rough selection. I'm going to copy that and then paste it into a new layer. And there's my rough selection. What I'm going to do now is zoom in, and with this layer of my selection active, I'm going to select a few pieces of snow. Just use my lasso tool. And I'll add to the selection. I just want to get a few of them to get the color range. And I don't want to get much of the blue or dark blue background. Okay, so I've got a few selections there of some color ranges. Now what I'm going to do is say select similar, and it will go out and select similar colors. And see, like, it just got a whole bunch of the snow, and that's exactly what I wanted. So now I'm going to copy that selection and then paste that selection into a new layer. And that's this layer. Call that snowflakes. Okay, and you may not be able to see what's going on there, but we can make a new layer, and I'll just fill it with black. Put the snowflakes above that. And that's what we got. That's what we wanted right there. And I may not want those little bits. So I'm going to get my eraser tool. Welcome to compositing, folks. Oops, it's on the snowflakes layer. Get rid of that. There we go. Just kind of dialing that back a little bit. Now, all that's left to do is to paint the snowflakes again. So we hide this layer. And with this layer active, zoom out. I'm going to use my clone stamp tool, and with the snowflakes layer selected, I'm going to use the clone stamp tool here and option click. Now I'll go down to my masked layer up here. It is. And I'll start to paint those snowflakes on top of me. And look, it's snowing. It's snowing on me. Maybe I want to do it a little bit more just to emphasize it. I can do it again, sample from a different area. Oops, get back up into my masked layer. Okay, let's get a little bit of snow on my face. Get into the masked layer. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, to see what this looks like, let's hide this layer, hide the snowflakes layer, and then, yeah, that's looking okay. Let's zoom out a little bit. And we can see the snow in front of me. We see the exposures a little bit better, and yeah, that's looking all right. Images, you're going to have to make some decisions about exactly what the adjustments are, but this gives you a pretty good idea about where, even with a very simple photo like the photo of me against a fairly high contrast background, that still proved to be a somewhat difficult selection. And then to integrate it into another photo, you have to kind of work with all your different elements and then start to work with the adjustment layers and just be creative and figure out where you can sample content from. So once again, here is the original photo. Here is the manipulation photo. And then here's the resulting composite.